Good morning. My name is Femida Gwadry-Sridhar, and I'm the founder and CEO of Pulse Infoframe. Thank you very much to the Australian Ocular Melanoma Alliance Summit for giving me the opportunity to speak to you a little bit about the registry that we have built in collaboration with the investigators, Dr. Carhaval in Colombia, Dr. Sacco in the UK, and Dr. Joshua in Australia. This is the first global registry, which includes evidence generation all the way from the clinical experience that patients have to the patient experience that patients themselves have. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the patient centricity that's been involved and how we think about, building these types of registries. Collecting real-world data is not simple. It requires a lot of thought, a lot of science beyond the technology, and a lot of key opinion leaders that are equally important to make this happen. So when we think about, the road to treatment, it is really full of twists and turns, as we know. And so the way that we work is we start with a strong foundation, and that foundation allows us to build and to grow as requirements grow for the patient community. So what is the strength of a global ocular melanoma platform? The reason that we actually built this and the approach that we took was really to start to bring down some of the silos that exist in different organizations, but most importantly, to bring patients together from around the world. Forming one powerful voice, bringing clinicians together from around the world to really break down some of the siloed databases. Sometimes we're all building things on our own, and ultimately it's really important that we think about how bringing data together and bringing information together can advance drug development. And so what Pulse have created is an evidence generation platform that really allows the opportunity to form a strong community in support of patients, caregivers, and clinicians who are involved in the treatment. We also know that to succeed, we need to work together. And that's why this has been really a labor of love, bringing people together from different disciplines, from different countries, and working on a data dictionary that really helps articulate what the important data components are in thinking about the patient journey. And so in advance of building out the registry, the Omni Patient Registry, we worked together with the clinical teams at each of the institutions that we're collaborating with to really think about the data variables, not just in terms of everything that we want to collect, but also thinking about a pragmatic approach, an approach that allows us to think about what's practical and what isn't practical. And so that's really sort of the balance that we have to come to when we're building these types of registries. Obviously, bringing different constituent groups together and understanding all of the endpoints that are important for each of these groups so that it's not just one group that's being represented, but several. We know, though, that at the heart of successful research initiatives are the patients. And so being able to understand the patient voice has been a key component of everything that Pulse Infoframe has been involved in. In all of our 25 global registries, we have spent an enormous amount of time working with patients, patient groups, understanding what's important from their perspective, but also understanding some of the different health literacy considerations as we think about building out these registries and really considering how people learn, what's important for them to see. And I'm going to share a little bit more about what we've done with respect to making this a very engaging platform for all of the end users. At the beginning, though, we have to think about what are the key components in considering a patient journey. And the patient journey really starts with understanding symptoms, diagnosis, the condition progression, treatment, and condition management. All of these different bits and pieces exist in different systems. So, for example, some of the symptoms come from patients, but several of these things are actually categorized and documented within the clinical notes, as well as the electronic health records where patients are being seen at institutions. add to this complexity that patients are not always seen at a single institution. And therefore, we need to be able to understand where all of these data are so that we can bring them together. And ultimately, these data then become really important for the next part, which is really to understand how we start to build cohorts or build information that will help advance some of the evidence generation that you see here on the right-hand side. So if we think about the existing data that's been considered as part of this registry, we looked at the types of data that would be in the electronic health record, in lab information systems, and ultimately pathology and radiology, which we're also capturing. Today, we're not capturing claims and billing, but we will be in the future, as we do in many of our registries, because those are the types of data that actually help support pricing reimbursement. And you may ask, why is that important? Well, we know that several drugs that come to market or several devices that come to market don't necessarily get funded. And so being able to be thoughtful from the very beginning, thinking about the real world data that needs to be collected, that ultimately comes together, is an important consideration. So essentially what we also do then is create the novel data, which are the disease registries, patient-generated data, which we do primarily when there's studies. So if there is a very specific study that is tied to the clinical registry, the patient has a portal and they're able to provide data that's directly linked to all of the clinical data. And we're also doing some interesting and exciting work in wearables that may not be relevant for ocular melanoma right now, but is for several of the rare conditions that we operate in and work in. And ultimately what we want is very high quality data that are mapped to OMOP. And why is this important? Obviously, access to clinical trials for patients, optimal endpoints that can be considered for trial design. And ultimately what we've built is this very broad clinical collaboration that spans the globe. And as part of this, we are also bringing in other data from other parts of the world that will help supplement the data that are already there. And so ultimately what you have is this pool of data that can really enable research and collaboration across each of the stakeholders. What's different about how this registry is built? When you think about a traditional approach, many of these registries are built on their own. You know, we have a melanoma registry, a uveal melanoma or Merkel or basal cell. What we have done is worked very closely with the Office of Rare Disease and in the United States, and really worked on codifying the common data elements and rare disease elements that are relevant for each condition. So those common data elements really form the foundation of what we've built. And then on top of that, we look at each of the conditions and the cancer-specific data elements, and ultimately are able to leverage the same platform to be able to build out all of these disease registries. Why is this important? It's important really because in order to really advance care and advance the opportunity to understand better treatments, we want to be able to go across multiple diseases, to use analytics and artificial intelligence to really understand what the commonalities are. And also, because there's so much crossover with different treatments, the best way for us to understand this is to be able to not just look within a silo or within a disease, but to look across diseases. And that's the way that the Ocular Melanoma Registry has been built. So, you know, real world data use cases are several in nature. And here again, what we're really looking to do is to move the needle in terms of how we can support easier drug development. And one of the things that we're currently doing is utilizing the data that comes out of some of our registries, and we'll be doing this certainly in the Ocular Melanoma Registry, is to start to build out synthetic cohorts, or what we call comparator cohorts, which means that more patients can be included in trials without running randomized controlled trials as often. Now, the regulators are just becoming accustomed to this and are certainly becoming much more supportive. But what this means is that instead of having some patients who are getting control and no treatment, and some patients who are getting treatment, we have the opportunity now to start to accelerate the way that we think about designing clinical trials. So this is still nascent, but very important for us to think about as we think about how we build these collaborative networks. How patients and advocacy groups can support development is all the way from preclinical, trial design, analysis and approval and reimbursement. And that's why the platform that we have built allows us not just to collect data as part of the network, but to also collaborate with other patient groups who have registries and are very focused on the patient side of this. And I'm sure you'll hear from some of them today. It's really to see how we can collaborate and continue to enhance our knowledge so that we can start to move more actively into improving the way that we think about access to treatment, and certainly look at trial design, and ultimately making sure that we have the right data to support pricing reimbursement. So that's the way that the Omni registry has been built on the Pulse platform to be able to support each of these initiatives. We also know that patient engagement is really critical. And so what we've done is set up a very facile way for patients to enter data when they're part of a study. So any study that is occurring that is part of the registry is attached to the clinical registry. And that doesn't mean that we can't collaborate with others, but it's a nice way to have a continuum with a master patient index. And there are many ways to communicate then the data that comes out of this, and also to keep patients engaged. So what we've done is done a lot of focus groups to understand better, what are the key areas that are important for patients, and what are some of the obstacles? We know that more and more, and particularly I think with COVID, this has been brought to light, it's really hard for patients to travel to sites to get their treatment. It's really hard to go and complete paper-based forms. And so one of the key things we've had to focus on is bringing technology to people. And it's not just bringing technology to people, it's making sure that the technology that is brought to everybody is easy to use, that provides some benefit back and provides dashboards and information, but most importantly, that the devices and the technology, as well as the applications that are used, are very user-friendly. We also have a very keen eye on making sure that we disseminate knowledge, but just to kind of wrap up the end-to-end patient engagement, the way that we currently have deployed the Omni registry is really around making sure that there's mobile access, so it's convenient. There's guided onboarding, so there are help buttons throughout the platform to help either patients or clinicians. There is a digital consenting process, which is really important because then it memorializes the consent form so the patient or their caregiver can look at it at any time. And there's an opportunity to embed educational materials and videos, which we have done in some of our registries. And I will show you what that looks like and what we're hoping to add in the future into this particular one. Most importantly, there's a lot of data that's being collected, and a question is asked about, well, what happens to all of these data? How do we make sure that they're being utilized and they're not just being, stored somewhere with nobody having access? And that's why the team working with the principal investigators have set up a really nice governance structure, which has full transparency around ensuring that the data are not just siloed, but they're really available for collaboration and research. And so as part of this too, our team put out a newsletter working with the PIs and the sponsors to make sure that there is awareness about what is going on in the registry, to understand how the data are being used and what data are coming in, but really to create a network that is truly collaborative and sharing information and getting feedback from one another to continue to improve. So this is an example of one of the newsletters that Sarah Kin, our product owner who manages the Uveal Melanoma registry, has put together. I've mentioned that, the registry and data collection process has to be easy and facile. We brought in a user experience expert to help create the mechanism by which data can be entered. And so whether you're on a mobile, tablet, or desktop, the data renders, or in the dashboard renders in a way that actually adjusts to the device. What you'll notice here is that they're dark green and light green, which shows what's been completed and isn't. One of the key things is that it's a rolling type of questionnaire so that your eye only goes to one question at a time. I'm sure we've all had to complete questionnaires that are long, and then we kind of get lost with where we are. So again, those are the investments that we've made to make sure that this is easy to use no matter who the end user are. So it's the same way that data will render for the clinician as well as for patients. Finally, there are custom dashboards and analytics that are built in. One of the key things is that we often ask people to provide data, and then we've got to ask ourselves, what do we give them back? And so certainly from both a patient's perspective and clinical perspective, really important to have data that is given back real time. You'll see a map here where patients can actually see where other patients are enrolled in the world in this registry. But as we start to work with other existing registries, we can continue to populate that so that people know where other people are in the world. And that just helps people feel continually motivated about the fact that the data that they're providing is, part of a larger network, and some value is coming from the work that they're putting in to providing data. Again, this is just a snapshot of how we have created our dashboards and user interface. There is a library. This is an example of the National Kidney Foundation. This part is completely patient-facing, although we do bring in a lot of other data, just to show you that there's a library that patients can click onto to find out about trials and to get a lot of information about what's going on in the space. This is really driven not by us as a content provider, because we don't provide the content, but we collaborate with advocacy groups and key opinion leaders to ensure that that content is current and important. And again, really helping the patient on board, helping them understand how to get into the registry, how to provide information, and what the value back is to them in easy to understand terms, and taking away the jargon from the discussion. I've already shown you the easy to navigate data interface. This is really something that we're very proud of because, again, we're trying to make sure that people are able to enter data, that it makes sense. And we're also multilingual. And also we haven't done that yet in ocular melanoma, but in other registries, we have other languages. So as this continues to expand, we look forward to adding in other languages for patients to be fully engaged as part of the studies that we're running. So I thank you very much for your time today. And I know it was a little bit fast in terms of providing to what we're doing. Certainly very thankful to all of the sites and investigators who are participating. I think we have a unique opportunity as we continue to grow to really make a difference, and certainly look forward to working with several of the patient advocacy groups who are also very engaged and really critical to the success of these registries. Thank you.